Greetings, YouTube. I've looked at a lot of campaigns in my day, and at the moment I'm still poking around at 5th edition stuff just for fun. And I've been looking at the pure Steam uh, steampunk setting for 5th edition. Now I own the pure Steam for Pathfinder as well. I've got that as actually a hardcover book, and I liked it. And due to my depression and anxiety, I just haven't gotten around to reading it yet. And it's been sitting there waiting for me to review it for, I don't know, close to 3 years. Yeah, I've got a problem with it. There's a reason my room looks like this, because I still try to tackle my anxiety and depression. I'm currently considering going on Adderall, maybe helping getting my brain sorted out a little bit better. But when I read the Pathfinder version, I very much read it as just another fantasy setting, just with the steampunk flavor. But the pure Steam setting is a little bit different because it takes place here on our continent. And it's got alternative countries and alternative political structures and religious structures, but it takes place on the North American continent. So it's kind of an alternate history kind of thing, and I love that kind of stuff. I really do. I love that kind of stuff. When I read the pure Steam for Pathfinder, again, a few years ago, I wasn't as aware of the world as I am now. I guess the snide conservatives would say I was not as woke as I am now. I am more aware of the things that people of color and people in the LGBTQ community and the indigenous people of all continents have gone through. I am more aware of colonialism and white supremacy, the patriarchy, social conservatism as the dangerous political movement and philosophical movement that it is. I didn't really have as much of an understanding as I do now. And I'm not saying I have a complete understanding. I am still working. While I strive to be an intersectional feminist, I strive to be an ally. I know I fail, but I'm trying to work on it. So the time between the Pathfinder version and now the 5th edition version, which I'm really reading right now, it's been a journey. And I can't help notice that the pure Steam setting just really smacks of colonialism. And it's not the first fantasy setting, steampunk or otherwise, that I've encountered that has colonialist themes in it, where you've got these Eurocentric kind of people moving to savage lands and to go discover the wilderness, even though there are multiple species, multiple ancestries of indigenous sapient beings that have already living there for nigh on 10,000 or more years. But those enlightened, civilized folks have to show up and discover it. Otherwise, if they don't do it, it's never been discovered. We have too much of that in the real world. And I've decided I don't like it in my fantasy games, or my science fiction games for that matter. I understand that extracting colonialism is going to create worlds that aren't going to be as recognizable by a lot of people, because we've just accepted colonialism as part and parcel of our reality. It is the warp and weft of the world we live in. I'm sitting on land that belonged to indigenous people hundreds of years ago, and they're long gone, quite possibly extinct. All of America sits on stolen land. All of it. And we made a really good try as a nation at exterminating all the indigenous people on this continent, or at least converting them to the civilized way of living and away from their traditional culture. And I don't want that in my games anymore. Some are going to say I'm looking for an unrealistic setting. Okay, then I am. But remember, it's a fantasy setting that's got dwarves and elves and halflings and fairies and dragons and wizards and druids and all kinds of demons and devils and monsters that roam in the night. And we all accept that without even blinking an eye. I mean, multiple settings have flumps in them. And nobody really thinks that's weird. That you travel to different dimensions regularly in a high fantasy setting. If you're doing Spelljammer, or Planescape, it's a regular thing. It's part of the setting. It's part of the fun of those settings, going to new worlds and discovering stuff. But you can do that without being colonists, without dragging along all the political baggage involved in that. The extinction, the extermination, those kind of things. I've been working on in my head. Actually, it's not just in my head. I've actually got some notes written down. I'm planning on doing a video, maybe even more than one video, about a setting I'm working on that is essentially, it's a high fantasy Dyson sphere, more or less. And when the gods have decided to place sapient beings there, they did it in stages. But it's a really big surface. I mean, incomprehensibly large amounts of land. So they were able to just dump entire groups of species of ancestries where they wanted them. Just went book, like they might dump 10,000 humans in one spot and 10,000 dwarves in another spot. But so far apart that they literally could never even know the other species exists. There would be no way for them to ever meet unless the gods put them close together. Though there are actually some other tricks involved that maybe they could meet. That's part of the fun. But so there is no people moving into other folks' territory because there's so much space. It's one of the reasons I find so many problems with so many science fiction films. Because, like the aliens show up because they need water. Why? Do you know how much water there is outside our planet? There are trillions of times more water in our solar system off Earth than on Earth. Same thing with resources. Go to the asteroid belt, you're going to be able to find all kinds of minerals and things that are found here, yeah, but in much larger quantities. And you're not going to have to worry about extracting them from a gravity well. So interstellar conflict and invasion make no sense. If you really don't want to be around other species, you just move. If you can achieve interstellar travel, then literally the sky is the limit. There's what? I've heard the latest estimates, they think there might be 400 billion stars in our galaxy alone. And there may be 400 billion galaxies. So, yeah, lots of elbow room. You don't have to have conflict. So it's going to be a much different setting. Yes, I know that we all love conflict. You love wars and fighting. People have been rewriting World War II in science fiction for decades. It's all over the place. I'm just tired of the colonialism. I'm tired of it in real life. I'm tired of it in settings. I think we can do better. I think we can throw away the sexism, misogyny. We can throw away the homophobia and the transphobia. We can stop expecting everyone in every culture to follow the same rigid, heteronormative, cisgender roles that so many people do in this world. Monsters shouldn't just be automatically evil because they're monsters. They're not human, or they're not elves, or not dwarves. That doesn't make them automatically evil. I'm sure that there are far more twisted elves in the universe than many of the monsters that you'll find in the player's handbook. The same with dwarves and humans and halflings. Monster isn't a body. Monster is something in here. And I'm tired of having settings presented to me that are so black and white. The good guys and the bad guys. There's no gray. It's seen as good to be moving into somebody's territory to civilize them. People might lament the loss of the noble savage, which is another line of BS. I just read a 5th edition supplement about an ursine species with 3 different branches: black bears, brown bears, and white bears. Not a real shock there. That does ignore several different kinds of bears in the world, but it's a nice, easily understood. Everybody in North America understands those 3 species, and you could just find what you want within those 3 species. But the supplement is just so full of noble savage BS. And it just seems to rip off so much of actual indigenous culture. To say that it's culturally insensitive would be an understatement. And I'm tired of that. We can do better. We can. If we can come up with the most intricate, detailed worlds like Tolkien did. Look at what he created. And it's so full of goddamn racism and misogyny. It's just chock full of it. And don't tell me for a second that, well, it's just the times. No, no, no. People in that era knew about it, knew it was BS then, just like it's BS now. They always knew. They just conveniently ignored it because it let them play their little games the way they wanted to, and they didn't have to think about things too deeply because that might bruise their fragile little egos. Well, we should be better now. We're more well-informed. If a 57-year-old white boy can strive to become an intersectional feminist, can have a Black Lives Matter poster on the outside of his house, can wear a mask that says Black Trans Lives Matter, and walk around in public in it. I can do those things. Anybody can follow suit. It's not some kind of GD genius. I'm not Buddha or Gandhi. I'm just a guy that's striving to do better than my parents and the culture around me. And I want to see that in the game settings. I want campaign settings that are rich and deep and have breadth and width, but also treat people like people and understand the word people is very broad. It can include all the traditional races, species that we have in campaigns. But it can also encompass Thri-Kreen, flumps. It can encompass ogres and orcs that don't want to be what people think ogres and orcs are. It can encompass redeemed vampires and werewolves that are proud members of the city guard. We can have complex, wonderful settings where everybody enjoys themselves. And you still can go out there and fight the bad things, because there's always going to be bad things. But the bad things, maybe it'll be a lot harder to recognize. Because you won't be able to just look at somebody and say, that's the bad guy. And someone else is going to say, that's Bob. He made my couscous yesterday. So we want a more complex world. I want that. I want settings that reflect it. I know that that's a big ask for a lot of people. I'm going to get all kinds of BS about the fact that I try to be an intersectional feminist. Whenever I talked about these kind of topics in the past, the comments are just cesspools of entitled, angry, straight, white, cis dudes. It's just unbelievable. Because when I question or I ask them to stretch their egos and their minds to encompass a little bit more, they show me how fragile they are, because they can't or they won't. Because looking a little deeper into the world that they've lived in and were raised in, they start seeing the ugliness, and they don't want to see that. And I don't want to see it in my campaigns anymore. Yes, it's a big ask, but we can do better. We can. I have faith in us. We can treat our players at the table with respect, regardless of who they are. We can try to strip out classism and ableism. We can try to treat everybody fairly. And we can have that in our campaigns. It may be as rare as hen's teeth right now. Interestingly, I hear some researchers are actually doing that. But we can still do it. So who's with me? Who would like to see a campaigns in the future that aren't stereotypes of the past, that don't just echo the ugliness that you'll find in old 50s and 60s science fiction and fantasy movies or adventure films? While I love them, especially the commentary tracks, I recognize them, how horrible they were, how they erased entire species, how they ignored entire cultures, how they had white people playing indigenous folks in brownface or blackface. And that was far too late into the 20th century. So let's do better. And I have hope for us. And I have respect and a belief that we can improve. So, who's with me? And who wants to see campaigns that are better than the world we currently live in?